Hey, good morning to those of you out there on the West Coast, way out there in Hawaii. Hey, Russ, are you awake? It's 6 a.m. Glad you're joining us. Good afternoon to those of you here on the East Coast with me. It's a nice sunny day. I'm always excited about that. It's Friday, the 28th of July, so I might go down to the boat and kind of relax a little bit this afternoon. Today, we're going to be talking about how federal agencies buy products and services from small businesses like yours. And I'm excited to talk about this because if you don't know this, I'm a process guy. I love process. Process means I can accomplish something when I learn what the process is. And here today, we're going to be talking about the process around that. As we get started on how federal agencies buy products and services and what I'm going to be teaching you, this aligns closely to Stephen Covey, in case you've never seen this book before, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. In there, one of his habits is seek first to understand, then to be understood. Seek first to learn about them and then get them to learn about you, right? So as it relates to understanding what the federal agency buys, you want to seek first to understand their process. How do they buy stuff? How do they determine that they need it? And then what do they do between the time they determine they need it and the time they buy it from you or somebody, right? And so seek first to understand that process. When you understand that, then you'll be able to be understood. And in this case, understood means you'll be able to come in at the right points of their acquisition lifecycle, how they buy stuff. So today we're going to be talking about how to really understand federal agencies' buying process. But I did want to mention this different topic because there's so many businesses out there. You're just getting started. Let's say you're under $1 million. You should not be knocking on agency doors, in my opinion. Right? You should be subcontracting. You should be working with small businesses, not even large businesses. You should be subcontracting. I was listening to the federal government themselves, even DOD, talk about how when you get in, you need to create a plan about how to approach the agency. No, you don't. You need to find a mentor, right? And so today's training, when I talk about the acquisition process of the federal government, if you're making less than $1 million, just tweak what I'm teaching you a little bit to say, learn how companies look for companies like yours to team with. So if, let's say SharePoint just happens to be on my mind, it's what I used to do. If you're a SharePoint company and you've got 1 or 2 people, then don't be trying to get into the agency, but follow this same idea of trying to get into a small business that's doing $5 or $10 million as their SharePoint expert. Get in there and learn how they determine who to work with. And so what I'm going to show you today can be the same thing. It's just a process, and you just want to understand companies' processes around selecting teammates. Okay, so today's training, we're going to cover down on 3 main things if you're tracking on the ride. And in fact, some of my slides actually won't have the thing on the left. Lately I've been doing that agenda on the left so you can track where we're at. But basically, we're going to cover down on the acquisition approach from 2 different ways. First, I'm going to talk about the 6 phases of the acquisition process, right? And this is one take on it, but it's generally the common way to think about how federal government acquires products and services. And then I'm going to take a particular agency and I want to show you their specific acquisition roadmap. It shows you exactly what's going on. And I love that one because that gets to the 3rd bullet here. And the 3rd thing I'm going to cover in the training is how do you align your own sales efforts to your customer or the federal agency's buying process. So that's what we're going to cover down on today. Hang on. It's going to be a fun ride. If you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonald. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to my federal sales training where I provide tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years as a small business owner in the federal market, and since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. When you follow a process A to Z, you're going to have repeatable, predictable results. It's what I'm showing you here in this 7-step process that we teach everybody, right? We don't just teach our customers. I teach everybody the 7-step process. And that process, if you follow it, is going to lead to sales. If you haven't done this already, before we get too far in the training, let buyers know who you are. Let others in the training know who you are. And those who come out and watch the replay, put your company name and your core competency into the chat. I just was looking at yesterday's chat and I really appreciate how engaged so many of you are to welcome others into the community. Devin, for example, who's one of the people who shows up the earliest, him, Russ, Nina, these people show up early and Devin was late yesterday. And other people were like, oh, thank God you're here. We were worried about you. You're 1 minute late. I love that because you're building a community that is yours, right? I'm helping enable the community, but you're building relationships that you can take out of today's training and to help you grow your company and help them grow their company. So make sure you're engaging in that chat, and don't just let others know that you're open to connecting. If you're in this training, then we all assume that you're open to connecting. Reach out to another person. Hey, I saw you in Neil's training. I'd love to connect if you're open to it. Let them reject you or accept you. But almost everybody, 99.9999%, are going to accept your connection request. Okay, so let's get going. I'm going to move at a fire hose pace. We got 22 minutes to talk about 3 slides with about 8 hours worth of information in there. So this first slide that I'm showing you, if you're looking at my screen, right, is the federal acquisition, what I'm calling a phased approach. So everybody defines it a little bit differently, but basically this is the 6 phases that lead to how the federal government buys. So phase 1, right, they're doing planning. They're thinking about what they're trying to do, what they want to do. Phase 2 is contract initiation, and I'm going to come down and talk a little bit more about it. But this is when they start getting going. It's like, okay, we're serious. Let's start getting the paperwork going. Contract solicitation is when it goes out, right? It goes out to industry and says, hey, anybody out there? Phase 4 is contract evaluation. This is when they get the proposals back and they evaluate these proposals for the quality of the technical response and the quality of the business and the pricing response side of it. Phase 5 is when they award the contract, and phase 6 is when you're executing. And so I want to walk through those 6 phases again and just give you a couple of tips on this. I'm not trying to give you all 8 hours worth of training, for example, in this. What I'm trying to do is to get you to understand at a high level the acquisition process, and then you can begin to do 2 things: align your sales activities to this process, and then also go research more of it. You know, as you learn what I'm teaching you today, go dig further into this with your customers, with your target customers. It's like, can you talk to me about contract initiation? I'd really like to understand how that happens within your agency. So that's kind of where your next learning comes from. Okay, phase 1, I said, was planning and forecasting, right? So this is where they're planning out what they want this year, next year, et cetera. And this is generally done really by the program office. There's guidance, et cetera, from the contracting shop and budget and analysts who are looking at that and giving the program office guidance on, you know, the acquisition of the funding on it. But really, it's the program office's job to be thinking about what they need. And this is really important to remember, because when I get to the last slide, when I'm talking about your sales approach, I'll talk about how do you influence the government at almost every one of these stages. Contract initiation, phase 2. So this is where the government is completing the acquisition plan. For most agencies, that's done by the program office. They've got to write it up, send it to the contracting shop. They approve it, edit, provide guidance, send it back. And the better that acquisition plan is, the more chance that opportunity will move through the pipeline faster than all the back and forth. If you've ever seen opportunities that just keep slipping to the right, there's a really good chance it's because the acquisition plan wasn't good enough, right? Not to knock the program office. This comes back to something else. You got to understand that program offices are experts at executing their mission. They're not experts at creating acquisition plans. And so this is an area where we contractors can come in and provide some level of influence, some level of understanding to the acquisition process. You in this live training, you're experts almost, or you're becoming experts on the government's acquisition process. You too can guide the program office as you move forward. You know, sometimes you hear about like sending statement of objectives, white papers, and I'll talk more about it. This is where it really can be influential. And then contract initiation is also where the contracting office starts doing market research, whether they do RFIs to engage industry to talk about the requirements, or whether they do sources sought to see if there's vendors, suppliers out there who can or are willing to respond to this opportunity as it gets ready to come out. This is where you really want to be doing most of your capture and influence. Contract solicitations, you move into phase 3. This is where they put together the RFP, right? So you're hoping they have a draft solicitation. This is where I would be pushing in my relationship with the contracting officer as I'm doing capture. Hey, what's your process for contract solicitation? Are you putting out a draft PWS every time? Are you putting out a draft solicitation every time? What's the timeline can I expect in there? You don't want to just get into a call, ask all that really hard and get out, because then they feel defensive. They're defending their process. It's like, I do a good job, whatever. We all are that way, right? You come and ask me how I do my training. I'm like, I think about it. I prepare. But if we have a relationship, I'll tell you, most often I'm just pretty quickly putting together the training because I got my day job to do. This thing that I do every day is not my day job. And so this solicitation, understanding the process from the government or the contracting officer is really important. And that tends to be done by contract specialists. I'm still a little confused by this, and every agency is a little different, but the contracting specialists, I've said this before, they're almost as powerful as the contracting officer in the fact that they have that much influence on an opportunity. The KO or the CO is the only one who's signing it, right? There's only one contracting officer who's that signature, but there is a lot of influential people. And at this point, the contract specialist is that person you want to find. It's why you often see in SAM.gov, a contract specialist is listed as the primary point of contact. And you're like, oh, I want to talk to the KO. No, these contract specialists are very knowledgeable about the opportunity. Okay, contract evaluation as you move forward. This is just when we submit the proposal, the government receives it, they evaluate it, they're looking at it, they're judging it. This is a favorite part of what I do because you got to remember, yes, you're trying to go after the win, but this is also a marketing phase, if you will. You have a chance to write a proposal to talk about how great you are and how great your approach is, et cetera. Even if you don't win, the program office is the one evaluating this. They're evaluating the technical, and then they're also evaluating the business side, the management approach, et cetera, with the guidance of the acquisition people. And so they see all this. And even if you don't win, maybe 6-12 months down the line, they wish you won. And so maybe you begin to get engaged. Maybe you're able to come back in and talk. Contract award, the one thing I want to just really track on this is that's when winners are win, right? It's when they're picked, but it's when debriefing happens. If debriefings are allowed, then this is where it happens. And you want to go through a debrief every single time, whether you win or lose, you want to go through a debrief so you can, there's so many values to it. So you learn more about it in other training I've done, but this is the time to find out how was our proposal when we submitted it. We thought it was great. What did you think? And then the administration is just the work being executed for the next 1 to 5 years, whatever that contract is, according to what you wrote in the statement of work or what was written in the statement of work. The important thing here that I want you to pay attention to is this is the start of the life cycle. If you just won or lost a 5-year contract, the capture process begins again. You know you want to go after this again, so put it in your pipeline and slowly move forward. And so the core, the contract officer representative, is engaged. You want to be building that relationship. Your team needs to build it if you've won that contract. And then this is where CPARs are. Right from the beginning, you want to be thinking about CPARs as a 12-month activity annually. So every year, you want to be working on CPARs at least monthly so that when you get to the end, you're not hoping to get something. You've guided the core and whoever else is going to write the CPAR into the process of giving you a very good or exceptional. All right, that was the generic 6 phases that the government follows, federal agency acquisition process, right? Here, I just want to show you the USDA's map. By the way, hold on, I just want to go back 1 second. I apologize for doing this, but I just want to point out, if you can see this, I put in red through the acquisition process, market research, proposal received, works conducted in CPAR, in the statement of work and CPARs. Those are the ones that we do as industry, and the rest of it is done by the government. So if you took a snapshot of that screen, just pay attention to that. Okay, so on USDA, this one here, I want to go through fairly fast because I am saying pretty much the same thing, but I'm just breaking it down into steps. So there's, roughly 20 steps in here. And when you start looking at this, right, the first thing they're doing is team formation and development. It's what I call the idea phase. And you're starting to engage the program office, what they call business stakeholders, right? And getting to think about what are you trying to get out of this requirement, et cetera. These 3 bullets here as they move forward is the understanding part of it, and then identifying critical information. This is where that first phase that I was talking about, I might go back for a second. It's that whole planning phase that's going on, right? And as you turn the corner of the top is when they move into the second phase, market research. This is where they're doing RFIs if we're lucky, right? They're getting out there. They're trying to get vendor engagement to talk about the requirements that are out there. They might do as they move forward, they have briefings, et cetera. But the idea is to get that draft PWS done. This is where you want to be. I'm going to talk in the next slide about shifting left, but right here where you see it says draft PWS, you want to be engaged earlier on So, follow that roadmap backwards. You want to follow it early on so that you can influence what the program office is thinking they're going to put in the statement of objectives or the PWS, the performance work statement, right? So as you go forward, this next step that they're going to do when they have a general idea of the work requirements that they want is the government's going to do this independent government cost estimate, I think. And so the IGCEs, these are really important because this is where the government's starting to think about what's it going to cost, right? And if you're coming in a minute, there's, you've got the solicitation, some other stuff. They might even do a sources sought. But at some point, somewhere around here, some of the agencies will ask us, hey, can you give me a rough order of magnitude, a ROM, or a guess, basically at a price? Well, they're doing it themselves, and they're trying to figure it out. What I want to recommend that you pay attention to as it relates to the independent government cost estimate is that you get in there earlier. You have these meetings. This is the difference between doing capture and not. When you do capture, you have relationships and you're able to talk with people within the government. You need to get in their heads. I know you think this is going to be 2 people, but the type of work you're talking about being in the PWS is going to be at least 5 people, and one of them is going to be a senior level 3 type person or something. Just putting that in their heads so they don't come out of the gate completely underestimating what it's going to cost. And so their budgeting conversations internally are too low. You want to get in there and get them to be thinking higher about it. So then as they move forward, you get the acquisition strategy formation. This is another place where you're influencing, or you're trying to influence the contracting officer in this particular case, whether they go set aside to a woman-owned small business, whether they go on this particular vehicle. And then as you move forward, this is some of the stuff that it goes into Nowheresville and you wonder what's happening and why the timeline keeps slipping, et cetera. But they determine their own acquisition approach and they develop this acquisition plan. But internal to each agency, they have different reviewers. Some agencies, it goes back to legal or it goes back to the financial people, goes up to leadership. All these are delays in the life cycle. But when you learn your customer and understand their process, you really begin to understand it better than the competitors for sure. And you understand where you can fit in. You're able to communicate back to your own team, hey, these are real good date estimates that I'm giving because I understand the process. And then the rest of the stuff on this third line here is develop the acquisition plan, solicitation, acquisition plan review. This is all the stuff I'm talking about. Acquisition package. So you have an acquisition plan package, I think it's called. So they're just updating it, finalizing it, and getting, and this is where I was talking about draft solicitation issued to the vendors. You want to be asking about that. You don't want to miss out on a sources sought or an RFI or a draft solicitation. So you want to make sure you're communicating with the contract specialist to understand when, or have a general idea of when these things are coming out. And then just wrap the corner, because I want to just watch my time here. But as you're wrapping the corner, right, you've got the final solicitations that they have. They're submitting an RFP out there. You know, think SAM.gov and an opportunity coming out. They're dropping it out to the vendors long before they've started slowing down conversations. And at this point, the final solicitation issued to vendor, all conversation stops, right? So then they come back, they review it like we said in the previous one. They do the evaluation, they award a contract. They do contract finalization details. So when they do the review, then they look at the opportunity and they've got to write some additional paperwork that is what gets sent out, and then contract award. So USDA though, when I got a hold of this, and this was like 3 years ago when I was helping a customer, this was awesome. We had like 8 opportunities we were tracking with them. We were able to go back and say, which stage are you at? Where are you? And because we knew that, we had a better prediction of how long it would take to get through than they did, because they were optimistic, but we were realistic. We're like, if you're at draft PWS, then you haven't gone through all the other people saying, well, this is no good. Send it back and do another draft PWS. And that happens all the time, right? And when you understand the journey your customer is going on, then you're able to understand the journey that your sales team will be on. Okay, so before I hit that last slide and talk about the sale aligning to the sales cycle, I just want to mention again that we have the Small Business Specialist Directory. This is a directory of over 1,000 names, numbers, and emails of federal small business specialists out there. We get feedback from them over and over again, updating different people's names. Hey, I left that company. I'm over at this company for large primes, because we also have large prime SBLOs. This is a free directory. Go download it. It is easily worth thousands of dollars. And so I want you to be able to get that. It's a great way to just get into any agency or large prime. And then the other thing is on our website, we have tons of stuff, and go look at it. Huge value to you for anybody, right? But I wanted to point out that we've got an Ask Me Anything question in there, and I love how I was saying we're trying to answer it in 24 hours. At the moment, I'm kind of at this 48-hour window because I'm getting some really tough questions, which is fun. It's fun for me because it keeps me really thinking about what people are trying to do. But if you've got a question and you've checked Google first, ask Siri or Google first, hey, what is a cage code? Then come to me, right? Ask Siri, how do I get into the Department of Homeland Security before you come ask me? But then certainly come ask us, because me or somebody on my team will answer it. All right, let's wrap up with this last slide. I really want to talk about how you can align your sales efforts to the acquisition lifecycle we just talked about for federal agencies. So they follow this pretty formal process that we just talked about, right? They get an idea about, hey, we have this requirement, product, service, whatever. We've got this idea. They start exploring, and this is my way of describing this, right? They start exploring that requirement. They're thinking about it. They're talking internally. They're doing whatever. And then they decide, the program office is like, okay, we're ready to move up to the next level of formality. And you see I've got this formal bar here. And that's when they're really engaged in the contracting shop. Not that they couldn't got advice earlier, but market research begins to happen. I think we want to reach out with an RFI to industry. Acquisition shop decides to submit a sources sought notice out there, things like that. The market research, they're trying to understand what industry can provide, whether it's information or just vendors. And then from that, we move into the acquisition package, right? The RFP is done, it's submitted, SAM or whatever contract vehicle it's coming out on, contract's awarded, and then it goes into execution. One thing I want to point out before I get to the rest is, if you notice, I put this informal underneath idea and requirement exploration, and I just mean there's informal sales activity or acquisition lifecycle. This is an informal acquisition lifecycle. And then you move into this formal phase of market research, RFP dropping, and award. And then I go back to informal, saying when you're executing on a contract or somebody else is, you have this ability to go right back into your sales cycle. And they're kind of in an acquisition life cycle as well, especially if it's going to be recompeted, which many, many contracts are. All right, so that's their acquisition life cycle in the middle. And some things I wanted to point out. The idea to market research, that's when business development and capture happens. And so you really want to be thinking about that. If you are hearing, and if you've ever heard this before, if you see something in SAM, it's too late. Not that it's too late. Feel free to go after it. I've gone after things if it's in my sweet spot. But if you see it in SAM, it's too late, because it's too late for you to influence it. You can only respond to it. So you're not doing sales at that point. You're just writing a quote, basically. But if you can get engaged earlier on, then you're doing business development and capture. You're doing sales. And I really want to encourage you to shift left. This is what we mean by shift left in the process. Go back to the earliest stage you can. At the top, I put in something that just says the strength of your relationships and your ability to influence the customer is much stronger when you're back at the idea phase, when you're there when they have an idea, or better yet, you're the one who put the idea in their head, right? When you're there at that point, it's good. A good example is if you do elevator services, like some of my construction friends, if you're the ones who go in and introduce the government to how you can use AI to manage costs better on elevators. You mean you can lower my cost by 5 or 10% by introducing AI? Yeah, let's talk about it. You just put the idea in their head. Whether it goes somewhere is a whole nother thing, but you have this ability to influence. And the farther you go to getting engaged with an agency, like if you get to the RFP phase, you have almost no influence and certainly no strength in the relationship. So when you're looking at some of this stuff, and I'm just watching my time, some of the things I put here that you can use to influence the acquisition lifecycle or the acquisition decisions that are happening during that lifecycle. So for example, when they're in this informal stage of really trying to figure out what are the requirements, what do we want, not how are we going to buy it, but what do we want? That's when you can be doing white papers, or nowadays you should be doing YouTube videos, things like that. Podcasts. You can be doing all sorts of podcasts that not just when you're trying to go after an opportunity, but constantly you're influencing your market by sharing information. For example, I just said AI and elevators. You can be sharing some information about AI and elevators in here throughout the year. and you're going to get on the radar of the people responsible for that in the agency. Some meetings, right? Meetings without an opportunity are very important. And what I mean by this is don't go in and say, hey, I got this opportunity I'm trying to pursue. Go in there and talk to them about how do you feel about the cost of elevators and maintenance and all these kind of things. I'd like to talk to you for 15, 30 minutes or whatever about how artificial intelligence can be used in elevator maintenance, O&M or something, and really reduce it. And so you're going in and you're just talking to them generally about ideas. You're talking to them about their needs. Those are great ways to influence them. And then conferences, events, if you're at somewhere and you're hearing them talk, you can follow back up. The market research is when it starts getting formal, right? So this is driven by the FAR. It's specific guidelines that tell contracting officers how they must be doing market research, how they must track it, how they must be fair for industry going forward. So that's great. If you're a small business, make sure you're in DSBS because that's one of the main tools they look at. Your SAM and DSBS profile make your small business profile. That's where they go to find small businesses like yours when they don't have them readily handy in their own, computer or office. They'll just look to the dynamic small business search. I already talked about sources sought, RFIs. You want to be responding to these when they're in your sweet spot. Don't respond to all of them because they will look at you and go, you don't know what you're talking about. But when you respond to your sources sought, like AI and elevators, because you're an elevator expert, they're going to love talking with you. Just bring in an AI expert and help you write that together. So you both win. This is where set-asides and shaping the acquisition happens. When I say shaping the acquisition, I mean getting it on the right NAICS code or contract vehicle, things like that. Through conversations, through data and evidence, you can convince contracting officers and an agency to go in the direction you want. But you need to get in there early and talk to them as you move forward. So hopefully this made sense on aligning the acquisition lifecycle to the sales lifecycle. And just remember, shift left on that. So here's what I want you to remember from today's training. There is definitely an acquisition lifecycle, right? There is also a sales lifecycle. Align them and you will succeed. When you align your efforts to your customers' efforts, you're going to have more success for sure. And so a task that I have for you coming out of today's training is go to any KO, contracting officer, and ask them for their acquisition process map. They'll give you a formal one like USDA, or maybe they'll just tell you, oh, we do this, and that's cool. You write it down. But if you're working on an opportunity or you're tracking an agency, go make this a question you ask later today or Monday or the next business day when you're working. Hey, I want everybody to just remember that we do live training every day. So we got a whole lot of training coming up next week. Remember, government contracting, it's not a secret. It's just a process. I'll see you in the next training.